Mary's family barely had enough money to get by, and then by the time Mary was 21, both of her parents had passed away, leaving her with nothing. And then eventually she met a man that she fell madly in love with, and they got married, but unfortunately that marriage would end in divorce. At this point, Mary was so devastated by yet another heartbreak that she just kind of accepted that she was not gonna get married again. She kind of embraced her life as a loner. Fast forward to 2015, and Mary was 61 years old and she was still living alone. Mary didn't really have much contact with other people. She didn't have much contact, if any, with her living family. Despite all that, Mary was not lonely. She had lots and lots of cats, and she loved cats. Anytime she saw a stray cat, she would win the cat's trust, and then she would give it a place to live, and she would feed it and take care of it. And so before long, she had dozens of cats living in the house with her. In February of that year, one of Mary's neighbors happened to be walking by her property, and they saw a stack of mail had grown on her front porch, indicating that Mary had not opened her door to get her mail. While Mary's property did tend to get a little bit overgrown with the trees and the grass, it was exceptionally overgrown. This neighbor was concerned that maybe something had happened to Mary. They knocked on the front door, but it was silent. And something told them that something's off. Someone needs to make sure Mary really is okay. And so the neighbor called the Houston police and explained the situation. A few minutes later, the Houston police arrived. The police talked to one of the other neighbors and got a key that Mary had apparently given them previously. And the police went back to Mary's front door. They used the key. They unlocked the door. They opened it up. And right away, they were hit with this horrible smell coming from inside the house. They stepped inside and they yelled out for Mary, but it was silent. They looked off to their left and the right inside of the house, and they saw there were all these dead cats all over the ground. Right away, they're thinking, okay, we've seen scenarios like this before where someone who lives alone that no one really checks on dies unexpectedly, and then when they pass away, all of their pets are trapped in the house. After searching the house top to bottom, they could not find Mary. And so the police grabbed a couple of the neighbors and they asked them, do you know anything about this woman? Did she say anything about where she was going? Did you see her leave at any point? And the consensus amongst the neighbors they spoke to was that Mary basically kept to herself. She did not travel. She didn't go anywhere. She mostly just stayed in her house with her cats. And so it was very unlikely that she would have just abandoned the property and abandoned her cats because she loved them so much. And so the police called a few more officers to the property, and the group went back inside of Mary's house, and they really looked for Mary. But again, there was just nothing. And so after they finally stopped the search without finding Mary, the police contacted Mary's extended family and they asked them the same questions. Did Mary say anything about a trip she was going to take? Is there any reason she would just abandon her property? And they all would say, look, we don't talk to Mary. We don't know where she went. We have no idea. And so for a little while, the Houston police continued to search for Mary in and around Houston. But eventually, after finding nothing, the search kind of stopped. Several months later, Mary's house went into foreclosure, and a real estate entrepreneur in Houston bought the house up quickly, and after cleaning it out, he put it on the market to be rented out. Then in March of 2017, when the property was vacant, this young couple reached out to the landlord and said they were looking to rent. The landlord was thrilled, and he sent over a lease for them to sign. And then once the couple had signed the lease and the property was theirs, the husband decided to just go over on his own and walk around the property and see what they would need to buy in terms of furnishings. And so the husband arrives at the property, and then at some point he decides he wants to go up into the attic to see how much storage space they have. Once he got up into the attic, he stayed standing on the ladder and just kind of scanned around, and he saw there really wasn't much up there. It was very dirty and dark, and it appeared like no one had really come up here in a long time. And so the husband was about to go back down the ladder when he noticed off to the right side of the attic, kind of far away from the ladder, he saw one of the floorboards was kind of popped up like it shouldn't be. And he stared at it, and he's looking around at the rest of the attic, and all of the floorboards were perfectly uniform, but that one was really jacked up. And so he was curious, and he kind of stooped down and he walked over to this loose floorboard, and when he was standing over it, he could tell that this floorboard had kind of popped off of this hole in the ground, that the floorboard had been covering this hole, but the hole was dark. And so he pulled out his phone and he turned on his flashlight and he looked straight down and he aimed the light into this hole. Now, this hole was basically just a gap between two of the walls on the first floor. And so he's shining his light down into this gap, and he sees at the bottom the remains of the woman the Houston police have been looking for the past 2 years. Mary Cerruti. While no one knows for sure exactly what happened to her, it's believed back in early 2015 when she went missing, she had gone up into the attic where perhaps her cats liked to sunbathe off to the side of the attic because there was a big window that looked into the attic. And so she went up there to maybe feed the cats or check on the cats that were up there. And when she walked over to that side of the attic where the window looked in, she stepped on that loose floorboard and it gave out from her weight and she kind of fell through it like a trap door and fell down into that gap between the walls. It's unlikely she was hurt from this fall, but when she stood back up again in this kind of narrow space, she would have realized very quickly that there was nowhere for her to go. You can't go left, you can't go right, and you can't get back up into the attic. It was too far up for her to reach, and there was no way for her to kind of use the walls to climb back up because the space she was in was so narrow. I mean, she could barely move. She also didn't have a cell phone on her, so she couldn't call anyone. If she screamed out, no one would have heard her because she was behind several walls of insulation, and because no one ever checked on her, there was no one that was just going to find her trapped in the wall. She was totally on her own. And so trapped in this little space, Mary spent probably a couple of days screaming and trying to get her way out, but nothing worked. And then eventually she passed away. And then unfortunately, all of her cats did too. Her death was ruled an accident. Just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.